welcome to the Art of Being Human. On the last segment, I set up a scenario for you. If you're a person who has been exposed for a number of months or years or weeks or whatever to individuals who have personality disorders or are very difficult to work with, what they would be like in terms of their personalities, what you would have been exposed to. And I have never finished it, but I want to go on with what symptoms you would have, what fears you would have, because if you are a person that's greatly afraid of various things, then you may have been exposed to a person either growing up or maybe a colleague at your work with somebody who's very egocentric. So I want to review what I did in that last segment and then go on with it, and maybe we'll be able to finish with this on this particular segment. I'm not worried about it, but I'm doing this because I want you to understand if you are a person that's working with fears and you want to get rid of them, and of course the whole section of that I'm doing now is how to overcome your fears and your anxieties and your depression, and what you can do to help yourself to do that. So I'm trying to get you into thinking in terms of what you might have been exposed to when you were younger, or what you might be exposed to in your work, or what you might have been exposed to by your coach, or the people that you dealt with, or the students that you dealt with as you were growing up. It'll all fit together in the end. So let me review first what I did at the last segment. If you had a mother or a father or a coach or a colleague that was very egocentric, what were their characteristics that you were exposed to? And I read down a list, and I'm not going to explain it, but I just want to read down this list again, and then I'm going to go over what your reactions would have been to cause you to be like you are now. First of all, this person, whoever it was, and it may have been more than one, it might have been both parents, it might have been a coach, it might have been a teacher, it might have been whatever it is, they acted like they were always perfect, and they felt like they were always perfect. They didn't feel like they had any wrongs, and they were always on top of things, and they acted like they must always have control of you because therefore you'd be safe. Actually, it's for their purpose, not for yours, if you stop to think of it. That they wanted to be in control of you, that they made you feel guilty so that they could be in control of you. You know, if you feel guilty, you let somebody else take control, because if you feel guilty, you're afraid you can't take control yourself and you don't feel good about yourself. If they gave you double messages of love and hate, I love you, but you can't do anything right, for example. These messages seem to be opposed to each other and you cannot reconcile them. If this person held you to blame for their anger or whatever their deprivation was or whatever it was that they were angry at you for, and you accepted that guilt because you just assumed it was always your fault, and if they had quick mood changes, if they went into rages and yelled and screamed and nagged, constant nagging is a terrible thing to do to a child. If they were sarcastic and demeaned you and told you of you having no worth, demeaning you means that you don't have worth, that they take your worth away from you. That's what that means. That they used physical and verbal punishment. If you were a child, they used both. That they constantly complained about their life situation and somehow shifted it on to being your fault, that they wanted you to be dependent on them, because if you were dependent on them, then they would have control of you. And that there would be kind of an ugliness about them, and there wasn't any holding. If they were a parent, there wasn't any kindness, there wasn't any holding or caressing, things that babies need, things that children need. This would be kind of like a scenario here, that they would have some of these characteristics that I've just listed off. It doesn't mean they'd have all of them. But what would your reaction be if you were a child growing up in a household in which the caregivers, maybe the mother, maybe the father, maybe if you were living with an uncle or an aunt, if they had these characteristics, what would you have faced? And how would you have handled it? And what would your reaction be? So what I want to go into now is the reaction that you would have had as a child growing up, or if it's a workplace situation, what are the reactions that you're going to have in the work situation because of the fact that you were exposed to this? Well, you probably would be very insecure. You probably would have low self-esteem. And remember, and I've mentioned this before, in terms of self-esteem, it's not just what you think about yourself, it's what you think other people think of you. And you feel that you're never good enough to please that person. No matter what you do, you can't make any headway. And that you're never good enough. You have feelings of guilt. You may have fears of abandonment. Abandonment is something terrible that you do to a child when they feel they can't depend upon you to take care of them, when they don't know if you're going to be around. And that will make them very dependent on you because they don't want to lose you because you're all they've got. So the person who is the one who is egocentric, the parent or whoever it was, they make you feel like you're fearful that they are going to abandon you because there isn't anyone else to take care of you. This is for a child growing up. They would make you dependent. They would cause you to have terrible loneliness because you're afraid you're alone. You wish to be taken care of. You have negative thoughts and catastrophic expectations. Something's awful going to happen. You would have panic and depression. This would be off and on occasional, or maybe not all the time. You would have no trust of them, or maybe no trust of authority figures, because how can you trust an authority figure if you fear that you're going to be abandoned? And you would feel responsible for all of the family situations. If it was a bad family situation, you would blame yourself for it. And you could not be able to reconcile the things that your mother or father was saying with what your experiences were, so you never were good enough. They would try to avoid punishment from them, but you would feel at the same time that you deserve it because you're not good enough. One of the things that happens with children, if their parents are getting divorced, is that they always blame themselves. It must have been something I did. And why would they think that? My theory on it is that because they perceive that adults know everything, at least some parents cause them to perceive that way. You know, if they think that the parents know everything, if they think that the parents have all power, then obviously the parents wouldn't have done anything wrong to cause a divorce. That means you as a child must have done it. Well, what did you do? Well, you don't know, and you haven't done anything, but you don't know that. So you must be something about your character, something about what you've done that's caused your parents to be angry with each other, with you, and as a result of that, they want to have a divorce, and somehow it gets to be your fault. Now, by the way, that's not true at all. You cannot expect a child to take control of adult circumstances, and they can never be blamed for a divorce. But they always blame themselves, and that's the reason why they do it. They're not good enough. They couldn't stop it. Something happened that must be their fault. I spent half my time talking to children whose parents were getting divorced, and I always said, it's never your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. That's an adult thing. It has nothing to do with you. But they always wanted to blame themselves for it. Now, you would feel helpless. You would feel like you had no control over anything, and you would have a longing for them to love you, but it wouldn't happen, or you didn't expect it to happen. You expect things to be taken away from you, and you have great fear of violence that might occur against you, especially if they punished you too harshly, especially with physical punishment, and you would have a great sense of guilt for yourself. I'm guilty. I did something wrong. This is the way I'm being treated. I must have done something wrong. It's all my fault. Those are what your reactions are going to be. Maybe not all of them, but I just made a general list. You could almost pick and choose what applies to you here. You had parents, or you have a coach, or you have an authoritative person in your workplace. They've exposed you to all these things I've told you about, and these are the reactions you're going to have. And some of them are legitimate, and some of them you can bypass, because I'm making a general list. It doesn't apply to everybody, but I would bet that you would have at least several of these. And as I read them off, you can probably pick out which ones apply to you. So what are your fears going to be? Well, it's going to be very much similar to what your reactions are, but you will develop a series of fears, or can develop a series of fears. Maybe you're one of the fortunate ones that don't, but you can't. And these are the fears that you're going to have. And here again, not all of these apply to everybody. You can pick and choose which ones apply to you. It'll help you to understand how you got to where you are now. If everything that I say is true in terms of the psychodynamics. Now, you do have to remember that there are going to be times when your nervousness and your anxiety are not caused by psychodynamics. They're caused by something happening in terms of your biological system. The hormones aren't in balance. Maybe your thyroid isn't working right. That can make you very nervous. Maybe the chemicals of the brain aren't balanced out. You know, you could have a problem that way. So there may be some cases of nervousness and anxiety that are physically caused and are not caused by a bad situation or psychodynamics that are not healthy. But barring that out, and most people don't have a problem with their physical system, but barring that, if you cut that out, then, and you did suffer from a lot of psychodynamic things, then these would kind of cover what your reactions would be. So what would your fears be? Well, you would have a fear of punishment. You know, they're going to get me for what I've done. They don't like me, they're going to get me for what I've done. Then you may have a great fear of anger that they may show towards you, or that you're afraid they will show towards you. You have a fear of being wrong, which means that you're not a good person. You have a fear of letting people down because you can't do anything to make them like you no matter how hard you try. You have a fear of doing bad things. You have a fear that no one's going to care for you, no one's going to be there for you. You have a fear of being helpless. Why? Because if they do anything against you, you're not strong enough to fight them back. And besides that, you're so busy absorbing guilt that it wouldn't even dawn on you that they were wrong. Okay, you have a fear of being held responsible for what happens. Supposing it's a job situation, something goes wrong, it's got to be your fault. You know, it's interesting. I was in a doctor's office, and it wasn't time for my appointment yet, and the nurses were talking, and somebody did something, and I guess it wasn't quite right. And they said, well, Dr. Jones is going to blame me for that one, too. And I could just tell by the way it was said, and Jones was a fake name. It's not the real name of the doctor, but just, you know, for an example. The nurse was being blamed for everything that went wrong in the office. So that's the feeling that I got from it. So you may be that one person that's scapegoated. You're to blame for everything that goes wrong. No matter what happens, then you will be the one that's going to catch it. You are going to be the one that's going to be at fault. Why? Because they're looking for a scapegoat. When a person or an organization or a boss looking for a scapegoat, they want somebody to blame for whatever happens. And they're going to turn it around and make it that person's fault. And I'm afraid that happens a lot in the school systems. I'm not saying teachers deliberately do it, but students may do it to other students. You know, a lot of this can be student-generated against another student. And when that happens, the child is going to feel terrible because he's being blamed for everything. And I think sometimes the violence that goes on in schools and other organizations is that people have been scapegoated and they have no way to fight back other than be violent. There has to be another process in place. If you feel you're being blamed for something that you didn't do, there has to be a place where you can speak your voice and that things can be done to help you more comfortable. And investigations can be done, say with other students, to see if a child is being scapegoated or not. So that's a part of this process. Now, fear of your needs not being met, fear of things being taken away from you, fearing authority figures, which I mentioned before, fear of being unable to control your panic symptoms. One of the things that's really bad about having panic or having depression is the fear that you can't control it and you can never get out of it, especially depression. If you're very badly depressed, your fear is that you're always going to be this way and nothing's going to be able to take and drag you out of it so that you'll feel better. That's not true, of course, but it's one of the fears that you may have. Separation anxiety, you're afraid to be separate from people, because if you are separate from people, then you have no contact with people who could help you if you needed to be helped. Fear of moving, fear of losing security, fear of a lack of care, fear of things being done to you, fear of illnesses, fear of something happening and you can't control it, fear of loss of achievement, fear that someone will take your place, you lose your job, somebody will take your place and you won't have any connections anymore with what your workplace is. Now, I know we can tweak this in any kind of way we need to tweak it. If it's a job situation, then you can tweak it and change some words and make it apply to your job situation. If you're a young adult and you have all kinds of anxiety, then we can tweak it to see what happened with your parents, what happened with the people who raised you, what happened with the school that you went to. Were you scapegoated as a child in school? Did you have students against you? Did you feel your parents were against you? What about your teachers? What about your coaches? I mean, you can tweak this in various ways. So your behavior would be that you might develop compulsions. You have to do certain things at certain time, very compulsive. And what happens there is the fact that those compulsions cause you to try to calm your anxiety. If you have compulsions, you have to do things at certain times. It's like developing OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and that is supposed to control the fears and the things that you think about. It's supposed to be a controlling device. Now, sometimes it doesn't work, but that's the purpose of it. So you might develop various compulsions. You might avoid punishment by trying to hide out and not be too obvious with people. You might try to avoid authority figures wherever possible. Miss as many meetings as you can. Don't face those people who could be your adversaries, even though you may not know who your adversaries are. You might have an overactive conscience. You're always constantly trying to do something to be right or to be helpful, and because you want people to look at you in a better sort of way. And you always accept responsibility for somebody else's anger. You don't stand up for yourself. Somebody's angry at me, it must be my fault. I must have done something wrong, this kind of thing. You're always trying to please, always seeking out the familiar for security, always trying to stay where you feel comfortable so you won't have to face something that's not comfortable. For some people, it would mean staying at home all the time, becoming agoraphobic, not wanting to go out because then you have to face people, not wanting to be in public places because if you're in a public place, you have to face people all the time. Now, they may not know who you are, they may never speak to you, they may walk by and smile or say hello, but it's a threat. It's a threat to see people that you don't know because you don't know what's going to happen. So that is all. That's all a part and parcel of what goes on with psychodynamics. You are facing people's behavior toward you that's egocentric. Maybe they have a personality disorder. Maybe you have faced that for years. And as a result, you have a certain reaction, you have certain fears, and you behave a certain way. So you can put all of these things together so that it makes sense for you. I'm just hitting upon these things. You can take and you can review them in your own mind and say, well, this part is right, this part is not right, this happened instead of that, and you can piece it together. So my hypothesis here, if I am to make a general rule of thumb, is that we are responsive to the things that have happened to us in the past. And a lot of the past that has happened to us causes us to have certain fears in the present. So it's like you reliving your past pain. I know there are other scientific words for it, but this is the way that I phrase it, and it seems to make sense to the people that I deal with. We are doing things in the present and feeling things in the present due to the fears that we had in the past that were caused by the situations that we were in and the personalities that we had to face. And so it all has a product it all comes to fore in what we are like in the present. Now, for some people, they don't like it because people go into their past all the time. But people do go into their past all the time if you're going for counseling, because this is where the problem started. The problem started in your past and gets transferred to the present by various things that you remember and various things that you became afraid of as you were growing up. And as a result of that, you are the person who you are today. So you have to kind of grope back into the past and find out what happened, how was I raised, what happened to me, and if I was scapegoated at school, or if my parents scapegoated me, if they had problems and they blamed me for it. So it all gets intertwined together, and you can figure it out if you look at it just right, but you may need help in doing this. And I wouldn't suggest that you do it alone. You need to make a search to find out what your past was like and what has caused you to be the way that you are today, including your physical health, because that plays a big part as well. And if you can fit it together, then you can get a picture of what you're dealing with and what you've been dealing with all along. But as I say, it's better for you to do it with other people than yourself. But I'm simply pointing the way and helping you to piece together some things that might be helpful to you in understanding yourself the way that you are. There are all kinds of people that can help you, and you need to take advantage of that, because to do it alone can be frightening. If you remember things in your past and they were frightening, it can be too frightening for you to deal with on a one-person basis. So you need to get the help that you need. So I'm going to close it here, and I'm going to do something more. I'll extend this over the next segment, but we don't have enough time for me to start something new right now because we're running out of time. So I'll close it here, and please join me next time.